All right, it's good to see everyone tonight. Luke chapter 9. Luke chapter 9 is where we are. You know, we think about this period of time of the Lord's ministry, and it's getting real close to like the third year. What do you think it looked like? I mean, just thinking about his ministry, the things he's doing, the life of Jesus at this time, what do you think it looked like? How would you describe it? Busy. Yeah, like busy over the top, busy. What else? Overwhelmed. So many coming to hear him, those who are seeking to be healed. And I think we mentioned before, we know that took something physically from him because he could feel when the power went from him for healing. Wow, yeah. What else? What do you think it looked like, the ministry of Jesus at this time?
It had to be rewarding too, though, because so many people believed.
Rewarding. You know, I can imagine to know that there were so many who were interested, who were coming to listen to the things that he would have to say and to teach. I would think that would be rewarding. I mean, you know that there are those who are turning away and leaving. And boy, you have to be careful that doesn't become the focus. But maybe it's rewarding to see those who are coming and listening. And so we think about what's it look like for Jesus. What about the disciples? Well, what does it look like for the disciples that are following him? What do you think?
I think they must have great expectation, because I still think they're in the mindset at this point that he's going to restore Israel as a nation
Okay.
to the prominence that was there under David's rule.
Right. Yeah, I think that's right, because the latter part of this chapter, I think, gives us some indication of that very thing. You know, what some were looking for, that he's going to be an earthly king. And so there's expectation. So it's like, it's not just about the miracles that they are enthralled with, though that certainly got attention. There are those who are thinking, this is it, this is the one. This is the one that's going to make Israel a great nation here on earth. We're going to drive these Romans out of our land, and we're going to have a king on David's throne. And so there are disciples that I'm pretty sure are of that mind, and they have that view of what's going on. It's John's gospel that helps us to determine a timeline more than any of the other gospels, I think, at least with regard to the Lord's ministry. You know, we know he died at the fourth Passover. And so John placed the feeding of the 5,000, which we're reading about in chapter 9 of Luke, after saying the Passover was near, and that would have been the third Passover. So we're getting real close now, and we're crossing over probably in this chapter and the next into the third year of the ministry of Jesus. So things are going to kind of start moving rapidly now, you know, with some events that are going to take place. You know, and sometimes to me, I just like to know where we're at. You know, I need that timeline to kind of help me get some things in order, to understand what's going on. So Jesus is going to be leaving Galilee soon. He has spent a good period of time in Galilee. But even here, as we go through this chapter, Jesus is going to be leaving, and he's heading south. You know, he's going toward Jerusalem. Now, I believe there's a quick trip back to Galilee again, but now most of his time is going to be more to the south. After all of this time, a lot of time has been spent in Galilee and places to the north, teaching and preaching. There are a lot of disciples there. It'll be interesting as we go through the story to see how things work out in the south, you know, as we get closer to Jerusalem. So here in chapter 9, this early part, we're going to read just a little bit here to start us off. Then he called his 12 disciples together and gave them power and authority over all demons and to cure diseases. And he sent them to preach the kingdom of God and to heal the sick. And he said to them, take nothing for your journey, neither staffs, a bag, bread, nor money, and do not have 2 tunics apiece. And whatever house you enter, stay there, and from there depart. and whoever will not receive you, when you go out of that city, shake off the dust, the very dust from your feet as a testimony against them. And they departed and went through the towns, preaching the gospel in healing. So, to take the gospel to more people, Jesus now was sending out the 12. There's going to be more to come, we know. So some have said this is like a limited commission. And so limited. Why is this a limited commission? Why would we call it that?
As opposed to the 70 coming later.
Okay, so there's going to be the 70 that's coming later. And then there's going to be a Great Commission, we say. Go into all the world, to all nations. Is what Jesus says right before he sends to heaven. And so this is just this first sending out of the 12. And so they were equipped with power. They have the ability to teach and to preach. And so they have that ability of revelation and confirmation. They can go teaching the will and the word of God. They can confirm it by the miracles that they do. And so there are going to be many that's going to listen to them. But for those who do not receive them, what are they to do? Shake the dust off their feet. Doesn't that sound a little harsh? Maybe, or maybe not. Maybe it's just a reality. There comes a time, that if someone is not receiving the word, or if where you're at preaching, nobody's listening, and you've done what you can to teach and preach, and they're just not listening, probably need to go somewhere else where maybe someone there will accept it. And so that was kind of the idea, I think, here of what was going on. So what about Herod? Verses 7 through 9, there's Herod is confused. Okay, what would we say about what's happening with Herod in verses 7 through 9? I mean, what does he think? He's confused. Why? Why is he confused?
I think he like the people, saw what Jesus was doing, a lot of the works that he was doing, but I think he maybe felt a personal threat against Jesus coming.
Why would he feel a threat?
Well, because he thought the people were thinking that Jesus would become king.
So if you were a king or a ruler, and somebody else is coming through your area and has gained a great following, some are even trying to make him king, we see as we go a little bit farther here. How would you feel about that? Because, kingdoms come and kingdoms go. And so, I think he's feeling threatened for sure. And so, what does he say about Jesus? Or what question does he ask? Yeah, is this John? Because he's saying, I killed John. It's like, I'm just wondering if this is a little bit bizarre to him. Is he really wondering if this is John that's come back to life? Or was this kind of just a figurative statement here? Or, I don't know. Or is he just getting paranoid? Okay, maybe he's just getting paranoid at this point, because here's someone who has such a great following. Maybe he's even thinking, could I get that big of a following? And so, he's pretty concerned. But what does that also tell us about Jesus? The fact that Herod would be concerned. Yeah, he's making an impact. That he has that many followers. And of course, he's heard about the miracles. Like, who hadn't heard about the miracles, right? And so, and the miracles were all without question. Whenever Jesus performed miracles, something happened immediately. Nobody could say, did that really happen? No, everybody knew it was absolute. It was for real. The power was real. So how would that make another king feel? Threatened? Yeah, I think so. I think so. So anyway, it's just interesting as we're working through the times in the life of Jesus and trying to understand the things that were the dynamics of all that's going on in society around him. And of course, his reputation. His reputation has really grown at this point too. I mean, Jesus has already made a splash, so to speak, back in Jerusalem. They already know who he is. But now he's had this time up in Galilee. Of course, that was one reason why he went up to Galilee, right? But now maybe things are starting to get a little bit more intense there too, because now Herod is saying like, who are you? And so these are just the dynamics of what's going on in the life of Jesus.
It's interesting to me that Herod was interested enough about what was going on with the preaching and healing that he even paid attention. A lot of governmental authorities, they would be oblivious.
Right.
But he's actually asking people's opinions. Who do you think this is? And so,
Good point.
because I guess he was close enough to what was going on with the Jews
Yes.
that was something he wanted to keep.
So it's hit his radar. I mean, he sees this. He can't deny what's going on. And he is asking questions. That's a good point. Herod is asking questions about, what's going on and who is this? It just says something about the impact of the work and the preaching of Jesus and those who are following him. Well, Wayne?
Last part of verse 9, after Herod had heard about Jesus, it says, he tried to see him, making me wonder why it is that he could not perhaps see him, which is a question I guess maybe we could deal with. But you would think he would have the power to see whoever he wanted to see or have him brought or whatever.
Mhm.
One of the things I think I recall reading several times is that Jesus, as he went about, would from time to time simply, I'm going to say, disappear as he went from one place to another. So it's perhaps possible that Herod could not get him under his control so that he could see him, listen to him, talk.
Right. And of course, as you said, we see that happen at other times when there are those who want to lay hands on Jesus or they want to get him and he slips through the crowd or he gets away. And maybe that's the same thing here too. So there's a pretty incredible story here, a miracle that takes place in the feeding of the 5,000. It's carried and it's talked about in some other gospel accounts as well. And maybe one of the better known parables, one that's turned to often. Hey, Chris, can you touch that thing? In verse 10, we're going to read just a little bit here. And the apostles, when they had returned, told him all about all that they had done. And he took them and went aside privately into a deserted place belonging to the city of Bethsaida. It's kind of like I would like to have heard some of the conversation there. The things that they had to say. And the amazement, I can only imagine, of some things that they would say. You wouldn't believe what happened when we went to this village. Or you wouldn't believe what happened when we went to this village. I'm sure it wasn't all positive. But they had a lot to say. And it's interesting, too, that Jesus took them aside privately to a deserted place where they could talk, maybe where they could rest. But when the multitudes knew about that, it seems like you couldn't keep some things secret. They followed him. So we're looking at our map again. And we are here again just on this north side of the Sea of Galilee, Bethsaida, up here on this north side. So we've been all around this north side. We were in Capernaum, and we were over here in the Gadarenes in our last lesson. It's not real far from these places, but again, just the emphasis all the time that Jesus has spent there in this area. And so on this northeastern side of Galilee, the city of Bethsaida, here, our favorite picture again, as we're looking over here around this side. There have been those who have thought that they have found the old city of Bethsaida, and they have kind of put down a pretty firm peg, this is it. But then somebody else found some remnants of another city, and they've said, oh, wait, this might be Bethsaida. They're real close to each other, and it could be that one or the other would be that old city of Bethsaida. But now if we have flown around now to that northeast side of the Sea of Galilee, and where we had been over here looking at that direction. Now, it is in this region here where the city of Bethsaida is at. In fact, I believe it would be somewhere right down in this area, right in there. And so it is here in this area somewhere where the feeding of the 5,000 take place. Just another view looking across. We're looking at this area in this region. Right in here maybe is where the feeding of the 5,000 took place. Somewhere in that area. And so this event is recorded in all four of the gospel accounts. And Bethsaida is a city that Jesus would have known well. They spent time there. And Philip and Andrew and Peter were from there. So this is their stomping grounds that they're spending some time at here. And so think of how many witnesses there will be who could affirm this incredible miracle that takes place. This feeding of the 5,000, with just so little, with 5 loaves and 2 fish, 12 baskets left over. We sing songs and we teach our children, about this incredible miracle. And sometimes I just want us to kind of slow down and think about this a little bit ourselves. What an incredible event takes place in the feeding of the 5,000. 5,000 men, it says. It doesn't even take into account women and children. So we're talking a huge number. And here again, the disciples saying to Jesus, it's like we need to send these people to town so they can buy food. Though I can't imagine that there's a town nearby that could have fed 10,000 people. And I wonder just how far some have come to hear Jesus. They didn't all live in Bethsaida, or Capernaum. I mean, they've come from some distance. The notoriety of Jesus is at that point. I think we said the other night, or this is Sunday. I think we said that's like, perhaps this is at the highest point of popularity for Jesus, somewhere along this period of time. And so to think of how many have come, how far to hear him. Now, they didn't come for the feeding because they didn't know that was going to happen. That was an after event, after the teaching. Now, in another account, there were those who followed him to another place, another time, wanting to be fed by him. And Jesus said, no, this is not about getting a free meal. There was the feeding of the 5,000 because they had been there listening to him all day. And now what was the purpose of miracles again? To confirm the word, to verify and to confirm that everything he has been saying through, wouldn't this be a good time for a miracle? And what about one of epic proportions that everybody could relate to and receive something from? Wow. And so think about how many witnesses would leave from here being able to attest and to affirm the teaching and the miracles of Jesus. I mean, it's pretty incredible. I mean, this is a huge event as this unfolds. And so after this was done, after the feeding, what did some of the followers want to do with Jesus? Well, what did they want to do with Jesus? Oh, come on, you know it. What did they want to do with Jesus? Look there at the end of the feeding of the 5,000, or somewhere in here. Where'd this go? Am I in the wrong place? I must be in the wrong spot. Where do they want to make him king? I've been studying chapter 10 all day today. Am I in completely the wrong chapter? Many wanted to make him king. Maybe that's in John's account. I've gone back and forth in so many places now I don't. By the way, in John's account, in John chapter 6 and verse 15, just in case you haven't gone there, Therefore, when Jesus perceived that they were about to come and take him by force to make him king, he departed and went again to a mountain by himself. That was right after the feeding of the 5,000. John recorded, that part. Oh my. Why would they want to make Jesus king? I mean, what does Jesus know about running a kingdom? They've already got Herod, remember? And the other. Why would they want to make Jesus king? What do you think, Tim?
Well, when you're thinking about a war, supply lines are very important. This miracle proved to them that he could take care of the supply lines for the army. They were ready to, hey, we can take Rome now. We can take Rome because of this thing.
Wow, what power would they have as a kingdom with Jesus as king? I mean, he could heal those who are sick. He could feed them when they're hungry. And when other armies came and they were wore out and hungry, they would still be eating well. I mean, just thinking about how they might think about those things. Of course they wanted to make him king. But of course, of an earthly kingdom. And that was not the purpose of Jesus, to be a king of an earthly kingdom. And just a side note, in John's account, there's another miracle that takes place right after that. When the great crowd came wanting to make him king, Jesus and the disciples snuck away, and they got on the boat, and they went out on the sea. And there was a little incident about walking on water that took place, but another story another time. And so back in chapter 9 of Luke, we find here, Jesus is the Christ. And here's something that he is becoming. I mean, remember now, we're entering into that third year of his ministry. And as he goes along, he reveals a little bit more to them as they go along. And he's already said to them things about, that he's identified himself as the Son of God, but he's becoming a little more forthright about that now. And the disciples, the apostles at least, they seem to be understanding this. They don't have a full concept of what this is, but they're understanding now, that he is from heaven. And so if you were to ask the question, and Jesus did, who is Jesus? The response you get may depend on who you ask. Verse 18. And it came to pass, as he was alone praying, his disciples were with him, and he asked them, saying, who do the crowds say that I am? And they answered and said, John the Baptist, but some say Elijah, and others say that one of the old prophets has risen again. It's interesting, most are at least trying to attribute who he is to some ancient Bible character. Well, John wasn't so ancient, that was present time, but some of the older prophets, at least they're attributing him to that. But then he says, but who do you say that I am? And Peter answered and said, the Christ, the Son of God. And so Jesus wanted to hear them confirm their own belief. I mean, these are the ones that are closest to Jesus. And he has some things at this point in time to share with them. Not as much in Luke's text, though in the next few verses he does, again, predict his death and resurrection again. But in Matthew's account, remember Matthew chapter 16, Jesus in a little more detail had some things to say in response to what Peter said here. And Luke, for whatever reason, doesn't record all of those things. But he did say here, the Christ of God. The Christ of God. Interesting choice of words here. Christ in the Greek equals the anointed one. That he is the Messiah. And the apostles, it's right to say that the apostles would later die, testifying that to the world. The apostles believed it now, it seems, but that was faith that is going to continue to grow, and they will be more forthright, confirming that to others. In fact, all except John are going to die by teaching that faith, that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. And so, in verse 21, there's a big question why here. In verse 21, he said, he strictly warned them and commanded them to tell this to no one. Why? I mean, why would he say that? Tell this to no one. That's kind of hard to understand to me. Why? What do you think?
It is. I think part of that is explained by what he says following that. He's basically saying it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Yeah.
And these people, like you said, from John 6, where they're going to make him king, so said you don't need to get too excited about all this right now, because it's going to be going downhill.
So there's probably a couple of things we could say with this. One is, well, some already want to make him king. And this would maybe excite some to try to force him to be king, and that's just really not the idea here. On the other side, there's probably some that wouldn't understand anyway if they said, oh, this is the Christ, the Messiah. When you compare some of the other gospel accounts bringing us to this point, there's a number of times, and alluded to in Luke as well, where the Lord has backed away from certain situations because it wasn't time. It just wasn't time to reveal certain things or to go to the next step. Everything in time. I mean, even the death of Christ, or perhaps I should say, and most certainly the death of Christ, was to come at a certain time when things were ready. Paul said in Galatians 4, verse 4 or 5, when all things were fulfilled, when it was time, is when Christ died. And so I think all of that maybe is some reasons for consideration here. But and again to David's point, Jesus had not come to be that kind of a king. The king of an earthly nation. And the time had come for Jesus to help their understanding, though, with his identity. In verse 22, the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and scribes and be killed and raised the third day. And so Jesus made these predictions again. So trying to imagine again those disciples that are there. The very ones who just said, you're the Christ. You are God. You are the Christ. And he says to them, I'm going to have to suffer a lot of things. By our people. By our leaders. And I'll be killed. But I'll be raised on the third day. And so just try to imagine that you're there, you've seen all these events that have happened and taken place, and then hearing that. And it could just be that the disciples, the apostles, they don't quite get the whole picture yet, do you think? I think they're still struggling getting that whole picture of what's happening and what's going on.
Joe,
Mm-hmm.
the way he says it in verse 22 is a plan. God has planned this, and these steps have to take place. And I think that's what they don't understand.
That these things have to take place.
They have to take place in order for Jesus to be raised from the dead.
Yeah.
But it is, each step is a different thing, but it has to occur.
There are different steps that have to occur. Thinking about, going with this, the idea that the disciples just aren't understanding why this has to happen this way. In Matthew's account, Peter has a response to Jesus when he predicted these things. Do you remember what he said? Or do you remember what his response was? Yeah, no, sir, this is not going to happen to you. And I think Jesus had a response too. Do you remember? Get behind me, Satan. Right? Because these things did have to happen. And they had to happen a certain way. There was a reason, there was a purpose, and it all becomes much more clear as we get a little farther into the story. That there is a reason, that there is a purpose, for all of these things. So then it comes into this next discussion. Verse 23 and following. And he said to all of them, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. For what advantage is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses himself or is cast away? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words, of him the Son of Man will be ashamed when he comes in his own glory and in his Father's and of the holy angels. But I tell you truly, there are some standing here who shall not taste death till they see the kingdom of God. Whew. Okay, kind of a lot said right here. But just to think this through quickly, what is our cross to bear? And I think we have to be careful about how we think about this. What is our cross to bear? And I'm going to tell you what I think it's not. Let me just start there, okay? Can I do that? Sometimes when we're facing some big troubles and tragedies in life, somebody will try to console us by saying, well, just like the Lord, we all have a cross to bear. Do you know what I think? That's exactly not what it's talking about. We all face trials and difficulties in life. But I don't think that's what Jesus is talking about when he says we have to take up our cross daily. I don't think it's talking about us having to deal with trials and strife and sickness and bad things that happen in life. I really don't think that's the point of what he's getting at here. But if it's not that, then what is it? Then what is the cross that we have to bear? Because, obviously it's talking about something that's a heavy load, something that is hard, something that is significant. Persecution. Could it be persecution that we have to deal with? And so if we are facing persecution, what does that say about us? What choices have we made in life? Who are we serving? Christ. Because we're not facing persecution if we're running with the world. They're not going to persecute us for running with them, but the world may persecute those who are running with Christ, who are living for him, right? And so if we deny ourselves and take up our cross daily, that cross is the struggles, the difficulties, the battles that we have to face to live for him. Follow me, he says. And so I think what he's trying to say to his disciples is that, look, you think it's been tough now? You haven't seen anything. You better get ready. It's fixing to get really rough. You're going to have to take up your cross if you're going to follow me. I think that's more the idea of this taking up your cross. Phil?
You're basically acknowledging your weakness, your vulnerability. You need to say it.
True. It is. It does. It identifies the fact that we need a Savior. Because we are not going to be able to do that on our own. To live for Christ is not something we can just strike out on and do on our own. But our strength for doing that has to come from him. And that's what we need. Yes?
It is interesting to think about daily, take it across the daily, right? I do think we often associate that with a burden we're carrying around, right? I think it's this choice that basically says, today could be the day for them. Today, you know what? Today could be the day because they're literally carrying with them the thing that's probably going to kill them eventually, and they're choosing to pick it up every day.
Yeah.
And today may be the day it gets used. And the word witness in Acts when it's first used, that's where the word martyr comes from.
Sure.
Right? You're going to be my martyr, mate. You're going to be. And so today, I'm going to choose Christ. Today may be the day, but better live my life than not.
And does it even say and remind us that we have to make that choice every day? That has to be renewed every day. Just because we did real good yesterday in faith doesn't mean it just happens today, but we have to choose to live and to walk by faith today. And so really it's part of this overall, this bigger warning that he's giving to them. That, okay, he just, again, predicted to them that he's going to be killed, he's going to die, but he's going to be raised. And there's some things here that are coming that's going to be pretty significant to deal with. We're going to move on a little bit here, hit a few more verses. This is a long chapter, and we're not going to be able to say a whole lot about much of it. We're trying to hit some of these high points. In these next few verses here, it seems we head a little bit north, because it's talking about the transfiguration of Jesus, beginning in verse 28 and following. And many of us are kind of familiar with that storyline, the transfiguration of Jesus. In fact, you tell me something about it. I mean, transfiguration. How often do we even use that word, transfiguration? But in the description of the gospel account, what is that? What happens? Who's there? Who's involved? Moses, Elijah, Jesus, and Peter, James, and John. Okay? Involved in that. And where are they? In a mountain. Okay, but what mountain? Some people say Sinai, because that's the holy mountain of God. People say Sinai. And here in this text, it just says, that he took Peter, James, and John and went up on the mountain to pray. And as he prayed, here's the event that happened and took place. I think Matthew's account helps a little bit. In Matthew chapter 17, where we read about the transfiguration, took Peter, James, and John up on a high mountain. But in chapter 16, where were they at? Do you remember? He said, upon this rock I will build my church. Do you remember where they were at? Caesarea Philippi. I mean, look, they had gone way up here to the north. Well, I say it's about 30 miles or so from Bethsaida. It's the only time in Scripture recorded of Jesus being in Caesarea Philippi. That's the farthest north we know of him going. And it was only for the event there in chapter 16 of Matthew that we know he went there and made, and told his disciples, I have come to build my church. Remember? That was the event that took place. And then we go right into chapter 17, and he took them up on the mountain. This transfiguration. Same thing as in Luke chapter 9. And so it makes me wonder again, what mountain? Well, it doesn't say. It doesn't say. But I'm just a little curious about it. I mean, they were in Caesarea Philippi. And within sight of Caesarea Philippi, do you know that there's a mountain? And I mean, it's a big mountain not far from Caesarea Philippi. And there we go. Mount Hermon. It's one of the tallest mountains in the region. It's over 10,000 feet. And we don't know that's where it took place. But it's just interesting to me that big mountain is close by, where that event happened and took place. As the story goes on, as we're reading on through the rest of the chapter, the disciples tried to heal a boy who, when they had come down from the mountain, and a man says, "Teacher, I beg you, look at my son, for he's only a child." And he goes on to say, your disciples tried to cast out this demon, but they couldn't do it. And Jesus replied to his disciples, I take it, "O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you and bear with you? Bring your son here." And Jesus cast out the demon. He had the power to do that. Little lesson on faith right there with his disciples, I think. And then in verses 46 through 50, there was this little dispute about who is the greatest. It was the disciples, the apostles, that were debating this. Who is the greatest? It's not the first time that they've debated among themselves, about things such as this. And Jesus again deals with this. Bring this child to me. He says to them. And he makes the point, whoever receives this little child in my name receives me, and whoever receives me receives him who sent me. for he who is the least will be, among you will be the greatest. A little lesson on humility right there to his disciples. And maybe a lesson about the innocence of children. And maybe a lesson about how we need to be as innocent as children. There's probably a few points that we could make out of that. The cost of discipleship is something else that comes up in the next few verses and kind of concludes the chapter. Jesus is now starting to head toward Jerusalem. We talked about that earlier, remember? And so, been up here to Caesarea Philippi, we're at Bethsaida here. He's on his way to Jerusalem. He has his face set on Jerusalem, is kind of what is said. And he's going through Samaria. Strikes me as a little bit odd, but maybe not. Why would it be odd for Jesus and his disciples to go through Samaria? They don't get along. The Jews don't get along with the Samaritans. We've talked before how often in travel, they would cross over the Jordan and come down and just skip Samaria completely, in their travels. But Jesus went right through there. But the Samaritan village did not receive Jesus because they say his face is set on Jerusalem. I'm not sure exactly what that means, if his face was literally set on Jerusalem, or if it's because of the things that he said that indicated that he was on his way to Jerusalem. But whatever the reason, they didn't like that because, as you said, the Jews and the Samaritans didn't get along well. And so that was a problem. And there were many who rejected Jesus. And so there were some of the apostles that said, Lord, let us rain down fire from heaven. Let us consume them. And Jesus, though, rejected that very idea. And the point that I think has to come out of that is these were the very ones the Lord came to save. Those who were not close to him, those who were not the people of God, are the very ones he has come to save. No, let's not strike them with fire. Let's lead them in the way of truth. That's what we should do. And that message hasn't changed even now. That message has not changed even now. That is, the ones that are struggling the most with sin may be the very ones that we need to spend the most time trying to get close to and trying to have influence with, because they as well are the very ones that the Lord died for. And so as we leave this chapter, As we leave this chapter, we see Jesus on his way to Jerusalem. That's where he's going. And that's where our lesson is going to be taking us as we go forward.
You were talking about the Jews' attitude toward the Samaritans. The question that James and John asked Jesus is a good sample of their attitude toward the Samaritans. Let's just wipe them out.
Let's just wipe them out. And Jesus is saying, no, why don't we save them? So the disciples, even the apostles, after traveling with Jesus for 2 years now, they're still not quite getting their position in a role. I think it's going to become clearer as time goes on. Thank you all for being here. Lesson number 10 in the hallway, chapter 10.